Hello. Thanks to Simon and everybody else for organising this event. It's great to be here. I'm Colin Barnes, Professor Emeritus in Disability Studies at the Centre for Disability Studies, University of Leeds. I'm also founder and was director of the Centre of Disability Studies until 2013 when I formally retired. Okay, the centre was established. I established the centre in 1990 as the British Council of Organisations of Disabled People's Research Unit. The BCODP were seriously involved in the development of the centre until its demise in 2006. Today I want to talk about the relationship between disablement, criminality and social justice from a social model perspective as defined by disabled people in the early 1970s. Disabled people included Vic Finkelstein, Paul Hunt, Mike Oliver and organisations like the Union of the Physically Impaired Against Segregation. It's notable that the social model was adopted by Disabled People's International at its first conference in 1981-2. Okay? So I shall begin with a brief word on the social model of disability and then turn to disability and capitalism. To put it simply, the social model is nothing more than a shift away from traditional assumptions about disablement as an individual medical problem, but instead to a social analysis or social understanding of the way society responds to disabled people and creates disablement. When I say disabled people, I'm including people with any form of impairment, whether sensory, cognitive, physical or long-term health problems, basically. So that's who I'm talking about. And it's important to state at the outset that this is not a minority issue. Impairment is a common experience for most people. Most people, the overwhelming majority of people defined as disabled, acquire their conditions during the life course. Causes include poverty, pollution, violence, accident, war, and ageing. It's interesting that the World Health Organization's report on disability in 2011 argued quite clearly that the biggest cause of poverty throughout the world, the biggest cause of impairment and disability throughout the world is poverty. And the interesting thing, of course, is poverty is usually the result of government failure and ineptitude. We'll begin, therefore, with an understanding of disability. It's important to point out that prior to the dawn of capitalism, understandings of disablement were contentious. There is, however, a general agreement that our understandings today were shaped by the coming of capitalism and its associate ideologies. These include individualism, liberal utilitarianism, industrialisation, and in particular wage labour, and the medicalisation of social life. As a result, discrimination in all its forms is endemic to most, if not all, contemporary societies. Contemporary developed societies at least. This brings us to the question of disability and crime. The ongoing refusal or criminal neglect by governments across the world to address fully the social determinants and inequities of health and disablement have resulted in growing numbers in disabled people in most countries. Corporate criminality is especially evident when governments and self-interested politicians blame disablement, the cost of disability and social networks as the cause of the innumerable economic crises that have dogged societies since the middle of the 19th century. In other words, all the economic crises are the result of welfare policies for people such as disabled people and so on, basically. This is not an uncommon phenomenon, as we shall see later. The net result has been a consistent failure to enact meaningful policies which produce and maintain a fully accessible infrastructure, including public buildings, housing, transport systems that will accommodate all sections of society, including people with impairments and long-term ill health and elderly people. Governments have failed to outlaw discrimination against disabled people. Legislation has been introduced in many countries. Some countries like the UK it's been abolished. But nonetheless, we have problems that result from discrimination in all its forms, and governments have failed to see to its eradication. We also have questions relating to benefit systems. Governments have failed to introduce fully comprehensive benefit systems that will cover the full cost of living with impairment and ill health in modern societies. Now, this is particularly important when it's most countries in the world, people have to pay for medical intervention and therapies, and in countries like the UK, where that is still theoretically free at point of delivery, that's certainly changing, but that's another question. In fact, if you think about the UK, a recent United Nations report shows that British government has violated its human rights obligations by the introduction since 1910, the time of the major economic crises, of harsh austerity measures that have deliberately removed the welfare safety net. This has inflicted great misery on disabled people and other marginalised groups. In particular, disabled people are more likely to live in poverty, be unemployed, be underemployed and economically inactive, and in many cases be reliant on food parcels for their survival. Moreover, despite government denials to the contrary, these policies still exist, all of which serves to generate and perpetuate an overarching culture that views disability, disablement or handicap, if you prefer, as an individual medical problem rather than a socio-political issue. Hence, disabled people are generally viewed as economically and socially dependent, a drain on society, or what the Nazis termed in the 1930s as useless eaters, and the right-wing press, certainly in the UK, periodically term benefit scroungers. This in turn fuels other forms of more overt discrimination and criminality. For example, infanticide for unborn and newborn infants with impairments. Often infants with impairments that do not have a major impact on their functional ability or is a threat to their existence. Examples include Down syndrome and cleft palate. Second example is the involuntary euthanasia for disabled adults in hospitals with the use of do not resuscitate orders placed on their beds. Notably, despite the consistent rhetoric to the contrary, and in terms of care and vulnerability, the government the Office of National Statistics show clearly that almost 60% of all COVID deaths in the UK are amongst disabled people. While there are certain health issues that have to be addressed here, the report also suggests that there are important questions that need to be answered by politicians and service providers. Finally, as an example of criminality, the leniency meted out to people who kill family members or friends of family members with impairments under the guise of mercy killing. Finally, of course, there is the growing incidence of hate crime experienced by disabled people, which include verbal, physical and cognitive abuse. Finally, although the link between disability, criminality and social justice clearly has implications for us all, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sex, social class and age, it rarely receives the attention it deserves in universities and colleges. This is the very opposite of what is needed if we are to make an important contribution to the creation of a more equitable and just global society. It's sincerely hoped that events such as this one can help forge a way forward in this regard. Thanks for listening. If you have any further requirements regarding evidence for these issues and other issues related to disablement, then I strongly suggest you go to the Disability Archive UK in Leeds. This is an archive of writings by disabled activists and their allies in terms of books, articles, research reports and all manner of grey literature on the disability experience in the UK and the rest of the world, dating back to the 1950s. Thanks very much for listening and have a great day. Thank you again. Bye-bye.